as it was in 2017 that in one of the most surreal booking decisions ever, Jinder Mahal became WWE Champion.
Now this title run came out of nowhere because no one, and I mean no one, expected Jinder Mahal to win the belt. Hey, yo, what's happening, peoples? It's your boy Blaze here, back at you with another one for Venomous Reactions. And today we got a little bit of an input video courtesy of Wrestle with Andy. This one is called Random Champions. Title runs out of nowhere. I'm not even going front. When it comes down to wrestling, we all got those title runs that actually matter, that we actually care about. And then we got some that just leaves us scratching our heads like, why? What purpose was it for you to put the title on this person? And I can name a few. ECW Championship, Vince McMahon. Why? World Heavyweight Championship on the Great Khali. Why? Jack Swagger with the World Heavyweight title. Why? It doesn't make sense. Like, what was the purpose of putting the title run on that particular person? Yo, we gonna check out what Wrestle with Andy's talking about with this one, and I know the few examples, they gotta make the cut. They gotta. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into this one right here. Let's crank up this volume real quick, and here we go.
Sometimes a title reign makes all the sense in the world, whether that be because it's part of a long built up story, such as was the case with Hangman Page in AEW, or because the person holding the title is the undisputed king of the company, such as been true with Roman Reigns in WWE. On occasion, though, a new champion seemingly comes out of nowhere in the most random of ways. But what are the biggest examples of this?
So true.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
Why?
And where better to start than with the time Vince McMahon became ECW World Champion?
I called it. I called it. And what better way to start off than with this one right here? Because it just leaves us the question, why put the ECW title on Vince McMahon? That was Vince's way of saying, screw you to ECW and everything it stood for, from my viewpoint. I don't know if everyone else feels that way, but that's just me.
Yes, the company which once prided itself on being the rebellious beating heart of the wrestling industry had fallen hard by the point the mid 2000s came around. And that was because after it went out of business in 2001, McMahon himself bought it up and pretty much killed any remaining goodwill it had left with fans during the infamous invasion.
I called it.
But as they say, time heals all wounds, and so when the Extreme brand was revived once more for a special one-night stand pay-per-view in 2005, for a brief moment at least, it looked as though things might be back on track. That was until the ECW revival made its way to the Sci-Fi Network, of course, because there, in their weekly TV show, it quickly became apparent that this was going to be nothing more than a developmental show for WWE's main roster, one which heavily featured the likes of The Big Show, Bobby Lashley, and Hardcore Holly, in lieu of some of the more hardcore originals the company had initially built their name on. Still though, it could have been worse. After all, they at least were actual wrestlers, so when they inevitably had their runs with the ECW World title, there was some sense of realism to the whole thing.
I came in front. When they brought back ECW in the Revival series back in 2006, I initially thought that we was gonna get like the good nostalgia of what ECW stood for. The cutting edge, hardcore, risk taking, the whole 9 yards. But as time went on, that turned out not to be the case. It I hate to say it, but it was just Vince's wacky idea of once again giving the high ones to ECW and everything it stood for, from my viewpoint. Because what did the revival do? aside from introduce us to brand new faces such as John Morrison, The Miz, Sheamus, and just to name a few, with the very few remnants of the old school ECW in presence. I don't know about that.
It's just a shame the same couldn't be said for what took place at April 29th, 2007's Backlash then, as it was here in a 3-on-1 handicap match that the Boss, with the help of both his son Shane and Umaga, pinned then ECW champ Lashley to take the belt home for himself. Obviously then, this upset the hardcore faithful to no end.
What up,
Oh.
G?
Durag Vince. Durag Vince was by far the most cringe when it comes down to the ECW and the ECW World Championship. Oh my god! I would give $100 not to witness this again. Oh god!
And they
Oh
let
my
Vince know
God.
this when he showed up on the next episode of ECW TV with the title and do-rag in tow. But why wouldn't they boo the booking here? As this was the belt which had once meant so much when it was being held by the likes of Terry Funk, Taz, and Tommy Dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
So to see it around the waist of the man who stood as the absolute antithesis to Extreme, it felt like the company was dying in front of their eyes all over again. And as
Low
it happened,
key.
this would mark the beginning of the end for WWE CW in many ways, with it getting scrapped altogether just a few years later. But that wouldn't be the only time Vince McMahon made a controversial decision to book himself as world champion, because he'd already done so 8 years previously when he became WWF world champion. That's right, it was back in 1999
Oh, I forgot
that Vince
about
got
this.
involved in an on-screen feud with then-champion Triple H. And it was during this feud that he was even convinced to have a series of one-on-one matches with the game, the first of which came on the September 14th episode of SmackDown.
Yep.
Of course, this wouldn't be any normal match though. No, it would be for the world title itself. Why had Triple H put his belt on the line against his boss? Well, because he believed there was no chance in hell he was ever going to lose it to him. But what he hadn't counted on...
But lo and behold, the inevitable happened. With, in part, assistance from good old Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stunned his way out of the WWF Championship reign. And I ain't gonna lie, that one was hilarious. I can't even lie. You got Stone Cold giving the unwarranted assist to someone that he despises the most. Because Stone Cold versus Vince McMahon, well documented.
Was the fact that by that point, Steve Austin had come to an agreement with McMahon where the two were briefly on the same page. And with Austin also hating the game too, it meant he was incentivized to get involved in the bout and help the CEO of the company to score the winning pinfall.
Yep.
And that was how, at the height of the Attitude Era, Vince McMahon became WWF champion. Sure, it was a screwy victory, and so it wasn't like Triple H
Of course.
was completely buried, but even still, this was a pretty bad idea all around. And what made it even worse was the fact that Vince immediately vacated the title on the episode of Raw thereafter, meaning the whole thing was pointless, as he never actually put anyone over. Honestly, it was an idea worthy of Vince Russo, so perhaps we shouldn't be surprised to learn he was still the head booker in New York.
No
at this
shock
time,
there.
Just as we shouldn't be surprised to learn he'd do the exact same thing himself when he jumped over to WCW and made himself their world champion in 2000. Now brace yourself, because we're about to jump into WCW 2000, probably the worst period for any major wrestling company in history.
And coming from WCW, that's saying a lot. Because WCW was like the forefront of the Monday Night Wars. Up until WWF introduced the Attitude Era. And that's when everything changed. And WCW, their reign of terror was slowly dying. Unfortunately.
While some of the absolute whoppers here, like David Arquette winning the big one or Goldberg refusing to follow the script, were bad enough, arguably nothing over this 12-month period was worse than the time Russo himself held the big gold belt above his head. Sure, like Vince McMahon, he'd win it in a screwy way when he was speared through the cage by Goldberg during a steel cage bout with then-champion Booker T, meaning he unintentionally exited first. But that didn't change the fact that the most vilified man in the entire industry was now in possession of the prize once held by the likes of Harley Race, Ric Flair, and Dusty Rhodes. And so, like with Vince McMahon, it made matters all that much worse when only 2 days later, Russo vacated the belt, meaning fans would never get the satisfaction of seeing a babyface beat him up in order to win it back for the side of the good guys. So really then, the only purpose this one served was to fuel the ego of an egomaniac and send WCW spiraling even further into its death throes. But not all random title reigns are this damaging to the company involved. No, some are just there to create a nice feel-good moment, as was the case when Bret Hart won the United States title in 2010.
Yep, another
But
pointless
wait,
run.
how did this one come about? After all, by 2010, the Hitman had long retired after a severe concussion picked up in 2001 left him unable to get cleared by any doctor under the sun. Well, the answer to this was there was a loophole in that as long as he didn't take any bumps, Hart could actually still be booked to step inside the squared circle. And that was how we got a situation where, on May 17th of the former year, The Miz was forced to put his US belt up against a member of the Hart family, with him at this time no doubt expecting this would either be Tyson Kidd or Davey Boy Smith Jr. How surprised he must have been then when Bret Hart came out to the ring and accepted the challenge. Obviously surprised enough that he was so thrown off his game, he'd lose in short order after tapping out to a sharpshooter. Yes, just like that, the Hitman had gold around his waist again, and fans got one last chance to celebrate along with him.
I'm not even gonna lie. Seeing Bret Hart with gold again may give off like a touch of nostalgia to some people, but at this point, he was already comfortable being retired. Aside from the one-off match, I don't know if you could call it that, the one-off match we had with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26. Now, for him to have gold around his waist at the age he's in, it really didn't make no sense. Like, why have the Miz lose the US title only to have it vacated like a week or two later? Like, help me make it make sense, because I don't get it.
The Hall of Famer is champion again!
Unfortunately, though, this was another example of a random title reign which was short-lived, because with him unable to have a full match where he'd be required to sell for his opponent, Bret realized he couldn't fulfill his duties as champion going forward, and so that's why he chose to vacate the title the following week on Raw. But for as sad as it was, this was so short-lived, it wasn't as if he was the only legend of a prior generation who'd get to win a title during this period. And that was because, just a few years prior to this, Ric Flair was fulfilling a lifelong ambition when he got to team up with his hero, Roddy Piper, to win the World Tag Team titles. That's right, it was at November 6, 2006's Cyber Sunday that Hot Rod was one of 3 options fans got the chance to vote on when they were asked to pick a partner for the Nature Boy during his tag team title bout against then champions, the Spirit Squad. And when Piper won out,
the damn Spirit Squad. Who remembers them? But yeah, Roddy Piper and Ric Flair as tag team champions. Now, granted, they were able to dethrone the Spirit Squad, but over a course of a few or several weeks later, they dropped the titles to Rated RKO. Now, granted, it was a touch of nostalgia, but still.
Out over both Sergeant Slaughter and Dusty Rhodes then, Flair was overjoyed as after a fight which lasted for just under 7 minutes, he'd find himself one half of the new tag team champions. Yes, in a moment no one could have foreseen ahead of time, 2 of the 80s most prominent figures were now holding gold all over again in the middle of the 2000s, and
True.
looks to be having a great time in doing so. But while this run wouldn't last for long on account of them losing to Rated RKO a week later, it still gave fans a fun moment of nostalgia for a week or so at least. It's just a shame the same can't be said for another random tag team title reign then, as we're pretty sure no one was clamoring to see the alleged dream team of Kenzo Suzuki and Rene Dupree take home the gold in late 2004.
That's
That said,
interesting.
Given how devalued the tag team division as a whole was at this point, we can't exactly call this one too out of the blue, as it was the period where makeshift duos were the order of the day. And of those teams who weren't just randomly thrown
Facts.
together and had at least some kind of thematic connection, well, those wouldn't be much better. After all, need we remind you of the horror that was the likes of Deuce and Domino or the Basham Brothers? But it's neither of those teams which serves as the most random WWE Tag Team title run of the
Don't
mid-2000s
remind us of that,
in the end,
please.
as they each fit together to some degree. When it came to Suzuki and Dupree, though, they couldn't have been more ill-suited to one another. And that's because one was a French-Canadian who'd come up in the New York system and who was pretty much a poster boy for the kind of sports entertainment figure Vince McMahon wanted, while the other was a man whose prior success had been out east in Japan. And sure, there's an argument that opposites attracted here, as on September 7th of 2004, the pair were able to dethrone Billy Kidman and Paul London to win the blue brand version of the tag team gold. But that doesn't make the whole thing feel any less random. Hell, even as they were winning, they clearly had no chemistry together. And this lack of chemistry would only continue on as they defended said belts across the weeks and months which followed.
Lack of chemistry, that can lead to a downfall when it comes to title reigns within the tag team division. But as he said, the tag team division has become watered down and it needed a massive, massive life support resurgence. And lo and behold, we kind of got that later on, and the tag team division has been on fire, from my view.
Really, we're baffled the duo held on to their titles for as long as they did, because it was like watching chalk and cheese work together at the best of times. But somehow, they
Chalk and
managed
cheese.
this, and maybe that's a testament to the individual skill of each then. Well, it's either that or a condemnation of how bad the tag division was in the mid-2000s. We're not exactly sure which. Yes,
It was more
outside
so
of
the
a couple
latter.
of notable periods, tag team wrestling has never been a big focus for Vince McMahon, and that's not the only division he's seemingly had no interest in either, despite repeated attempts to revive it over the years. When it comes to the Cruiserweight division, however, they never even got to have that high point on the main roster. And to make matters worse, their low points also included the time
Oh,
Hornswoggle
Lord.
became champion. Now, we're sure you can understand the kind of joke the boss was probably trying to go for here. The Cruiserweights are too small, so
Obviously.
let's have a literal person hold on to the belt for a while. Sure, it's not particularly funny, but then this is Vince McMahon we're dealing with here. And that's not a knock against Hornswoggle. No, he'd served a purpose on TV at this point as a manager to Finlay, someone who often helped the Irishman to pick up a screwy win whenever he was struggling to best his opponent. But when that role
True
was then
statement.
extended to have him be the de facto best cruiserweight performer in all of New York, it started to stretch itself a bit thin. After all, let's not forget that this was a period where the likes of Juventud Guerrera, Billy Kidman, and Gregory Helms were working for the company, so it wasn't like the talent wasn't there.
I mean, three of the best cruiserweights in the divisions. Yeah, three of the best cruiserweights in the division. If not the absolute, at least within the top 10. Because we had some talented cruiserweights back then. And any one of those would have been worthy of a cruiserweight title reign. But to put the belt on Hornswoggle, I just want to know what the hell was Vince thinking. Because no one can understand the mindset of Vince McMahon. I mean, even if you tried, I'm pretty sure you would have a brain aneurysm trying to understand and comprehend what he was thinking. Because nobody knows. Oh boy.
But as has always been the case with WWE's chief, if your height starts with a 5 and you're not named Rey Mysterio, then you're not going to get anywhere in his company. So pretty quickly, each of these performers were made to look like jobbers in comparison to the real heavyweight main eventers. And that's what led to a situation where the cruiserweight title became a complete afterthought, with no consideration being given to who was holding it at the best of times. Even then, though, it still came as a surprise to many when Hornswoggle pinned Jamie Noble to take home the gold at July 22, 2007's Great American Bash, as at this point, he was barely even considered an active wrestler on the roster. And to make matters worse, not only would this be a random title reign, it would also be the last one the division ever saw until 2016, as it was in September of the same year that the belt was formally retired when Vicky Guerrero deemed the Wisconsin native incapable of carrying on his duties as champion anymore. That said, for as crazy as it was at the time, even the saga of Dylan Postal as Cruiserweight champion may come second in terms of complete randomness when compared to another who held that same belt a few years prior. Who are we talking about here? Why, Chavo Classic, of course. Yes, despite having a storied career which saw him spend the 70s and 80s wrestling for territories such as Mid-South Wrestling, the AWA, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and All Japan Pro Wrestling, what most younger fans probably know Chavo Guerrero Sr. for nowadays is the brief run he had in 2004 as a member of the SmackDown roster. And that's because, after coming in then to help out his son Chavo Jr. during his feud with Eddie Guerrero, the El Paso native decided to stick around, with him differentiating himself from his offspring at this point by referring to himself as Chavo Classic. Of course, now
Chavo freaking Classic. Honestly, Chavo Senior, he would have been better off just being like, being in the manager role for Chavo Guerrero, because having him be an active competitor and him being the cruiserweight champion made no sense. I guess this is WWE's way of giving nostalgia back, but it wasn't needed, from my view.
Now that he decided he was staying on the roster for a little while, Chavo Classic had no intention of being an afterthought, and that was why he started staking his claim at some gold soon thereafter. What would this gold be?
Just why?
Well, for him, it could be nothing other than the belt his son was holding already, and that was the Cruiserweight title. Sure, for fans watching, it might have felt surreal to see a 55-year-old man start challenging for a belt his offspring had made his own, and that sense of the whole thing being a strange nightmare only got more intense when, on the May 18th episode of SmackDown that year, Chavo Classic actually pinned his son to become the oldest Cruiserweight champion in the company's history. That's right, in 2004, Chavo Guerrero Sr. was the de facto best cruiserweight in the world. And if that doesn't make you wonder whether life is real, we don't know what will. But this wasn't even the weirdest part of the whole thing, as during his subsequent 28-day run on top, the former NWA Junior World Heavyweight Champion actually scored victories over both John Cena and Jacqueline, all before then dropping the belt to Rey Mysterio on June 15th. Honestly, if you told us this one was all something we made up in our heads, we might believe you if it wasn't already there on film. And the same thing could be said for an even wilder title run, which came over a decade later, as it was in 2017 that in one of the most surreal booking decisions ever, Jinder Mahal became WWE champion.
Now this title run came out of nowhere, because no one, and I mean no one, expected Jinder Mahal to win the belt from Randy Orton. And it was just so random, and people was still in shock, like, he won the belt. And I would say it actually did something for his career, but under the same breath, it really didn't, because no one cared to see Jinder Mahal as champion. I mean, I'm just speaking for the general perspective of wrestling fans across the universe, but then you do have some that will actually appreciate Jinder Mahal as champion, because he is from India, and the Indian folks, they will actually look up to him being champion, being on top of the mountain, which is WWE. And I get that. And I totally understand it. I'm just saying, from my view, really didn't do too much for his career. From my take.
Quick, imagine going back to 2016 and telling yourself one of New York's biggest jobbers would soon be dethroning Randy Orton to take home the biggest prize in the company.
Exactly.
You'd probably laugh at yourself and call yourself crazy. And that's because no one could have ever foreseen a future where Jinder Mahal, the man whose most notable moment prior to this was as part of a comedy undercard trio in 3MB, would be in a position to even challenge for the belt. But this is exactly what happened when, upon winning a random number one contendership bout on the April 18th episode of SmackDown, the Calgary native suddenly found himself next in line. And while this victory came completely
out of nowhere,
it paled in comparison to how random it felt just 1 month later on May 21st at Backlash, when he not only stepped in the ring to square off against the Viper, but he actually beat him. Yeah, somehow Jinder Mahal had become WWE champion.
I am already the greatest WWE champion of all time.
Unfortunately, though, it quickly became evident during his subsequent time with the belt that he wasn't quite ready for the big time, with many fans claiming this to be one of the worst championship runs of the modern era.
Yeah. When you put the belt on someone that out of nowhere you really didn't expect to win, and then they actually win the championship belt, but they're not actually ready to take on the responsibility of being the forefront of the company. That could be disastrous. And I believe that's what happened with Jinder Mahal, which is why I said, it really didn't do too much for his career because he really didn't know how to handle that. But he had to learn quickly because all eyes were on Jinder Mahal. Like he is the face of the company with the belt. He had to learn quickly, otherwise he would have folded like quickly. From my take.
That said, for as out there as this title run was, there may still be one reign with the top belt in WWE which trumps it. And this is because after spending years as either a mid-card singles act or tag team guy during the Attitude Era and beyond, in 2004, Bradshaw suddenly found himself morphing into JBL and winning the WWE title himself. Now, given the fact that he had a great career after that, it's easy to look back in hindsight and argue JBL was always destined to win the big one. But if you were around at the time, you'd know this couldn't have been further from the truth, as the Sweetwater native was struggling to get over so much, he was actually on the verge of being cut altogether. Now, it's since been suggested the transformation into the J.R. Ewing-esque mogul was actually the last roll of the dice for Bradshaw, and
I ain't gonna lie, when he transformed into JBL, that really set his career at an all-time high. Because he became this arrogant, pompous, I guess you say arrogant, pompous jerk that everybody despises. Like every time you would see him on the screen, you just want to go to the screen and just punch right through him and punch him right in the face. I know I did. But when Bradshaw became JBL, that was the highlight of his career. And when he won the big one, the WWE Championship, he was on top of the world. And honestly, he did have success afterwards. After winning the belt and dropping it to John Cena, he did have a storied career afterwards. For my take.
And that if this didn't work, then Vince McMahon was going to throw in the towel completely. So it's just as well it did work, as only a couple of months after debuting it, he'd be challenging Eddie Guerrero for the top prize on SmackDown, and actually going as far as to beat him for it. Of course, this new title run took fans a little bit of getting used to at first, as it had come so out of the blue, many of them must have felt like they had whiplash. After all, this was the same man who at the start of the year had been an entirely different character, one who was primarily known for drinking heavily and teaming up with Farouk. But after a while, the shock started to wear off and JBL settled into what was, at the time, the longest run as a champion in SmackDown history. And when he finally did lose it to John Cena at WrestleMania 21 a year later, the whole thing would have elevated him to a point he'd be a made man thereafter. And he wasn't the only person who became a made man after a surprising title win either. Though in the case of Santino Marella, He wouldn't become a regular fixture of the main event scene afterwards. No, his victory and subsequent success would instead see him become a mainstay as WWE's top comedy act. Sure, he hadn't exactly been portrayed as a comedy guy when he first appeared on the April 16, 2007 episode of Raw, airing live from Milan, Italy, as there he was basically just playing a random member of the crowd. But this only made it that much more impactful when Umaga came out to the ring and announced he'd be putting his Intercontinental title on the line against a hand-picked opponent from Vince McMahon. Why was this? Well, the person Vince had chosen was none other than Santino himself. So when he made his way through...
How ironic. Santino Marella's first night on Monday Night Raw, he wins the Intercontinental Championship. That one was completely out of nowhere because no one knew who Santino Marella was. And to have him win the Intercontinental Championship from someone as a destructive force as Umaga, no, on paper, he would have got cooked instantly. But lo and behold, it happened.
Through the people and then went on to defeat the champ in short order. Then it felt to the Italian locals like one of their own had just done the impossible. Of course,
Literally,
as time went
he
on, though,
did.
it became clear to all the fans that the Ontario native's real strength lie in his comedy chops, and so that was why he eventually moved away from this more serious champion role into one which portrayed him as more of a bumbling goofball. And in some ways, this makes his initial big title win feel even more out of the blue in hindsight. As for any fans going back and watching it today who only know of Marella for the funny segments he was a part of, seeing him defeat Umaga in a matter of minutes must have been a crazy thing to witness.
It was a crazy thing to witness. Because when you think of Santino Marella, you think of comedy. You don't think of him as being a serious champion. Now, granted, he had a few runs with the Intercontinental Tag Team and US title, if I'm not mistaken. But with Santino, he is known for being a bumbling goof. Oh man, some of these title runs were completely unnecessary, with the few exceptions. Like the one with JBL, honestly, that one propelled him to greater heights. Now, granted, it took time for fans to get used to because you're not used to seeing Bradshaw step into his own limelight, aside from being the tag team specialist. You never would have thought that. But when he became JBL, that completely changed. And with Jinder Mahal, I mean, I won't necessarily say it was a bad run, but it really didn't help his career and take it to greater heights. Like, it took a lot, I mean a lot, to get used to when Jinder Mahal was champion. And majority of the wrestling universe really didn't care for it. With the exception of some that were trying to get used to it. But majority of them was like, why? But the unnecessary runs with Bret Hart and Vince McMahon with WWE gold around their waist. Only to have it vacated like weeks later or days later. Pointless. Completely pointless. But yo, let me know what y'all thought about this one, man. Which title run did y'all think was the worst? Yo, let me know down in the comment section down below. And as always, thank y'all for tuning in. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this one. And don't forget to tell your peoples across the globe. Come kick it with your boy just one good solid time. Like, comment, subscribe. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to click that bell so you don't miss a video from the kid. Yeah, feel me. And please feel free to follow me on social media right over yonder. Now, this here's your boy Blaze here saying Chuck that deuce, and I will see y'all in the next video. And I'm out.